you mentioned to me briefly, and I have to bring it back up because it sounded funny, it sounded hilarious. But tell me about the marijuana tenants and some of these deals you worked on early on in your career. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Today we have Erik Egelko on the CRE Arena, and I just want to thank everybody for coming and tuning in, whether that's on a podcast or a YouTube platform or that's Spotify, however you're listening. Really just appreciate you all spending your time with us here today. And we have Erik. Man, Erik, thank you so much for being here.
Augie, thank you for having me, man. This is certainly way overdue.
Yeah, no, it is. And Erik and I have spent some good time in crazy places. I guess that's a weird way to say it, but yeah, we spent some time in Hawaii together. And then I guess you weren't actually weren't in California with us in Napa because of the baby, right? You just had a.
Pretty much like within like a week of the trip, the baby was due.
I remember that. That was yeah. So that was the first time I actually saw a picture of the baby. Was Tony Yusuf. We were like getting coffee at the little coffee shop one morning, and he's like, "Dude, check this out! Like Erik just had the baby," and Tony was so pumped up about it, man. That's how you know you got good teammates and good people in your corner. So. Well, cool, man. Well, thanks for coming on, and for everybody listening that doesn't know Erik, Erik was a senior advisor with SVN out on the West Coast in California, and still in the West Coast in California, but he's recently switched roles, so still crushing commercial real estate, but just recently became the owner, founder, CEO, janitor, marketing guy, everything of Egelko Enterprises. So, man, that's incredibly exciting. So, we'll get into that here in a little bit. But, man, I think first and foremost, Erik, if you could just kind of tell us like how you got to where you are today. Whether it's starting out from childhood, wherever you feel comfortable starting at, is how did you get to where you are today?
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you so much for having me on the podcast, Augie. It's an honor and a privilege. Watching you through your journey has been super inspirational, as I'm sure
Appreciate that.
a lot of the followers feel as well. So, I would say my story is pretty conventional. I grew up in like Central Coast, California, in a town called Ventura. Parents are still married, but been together my whole life. Spent my whole life in the same childhood home. My dad was a real estate investor and ran a debt fund doing private money lending for about 30 years. So he never really filled me in much about what he was doing as a kid. I just knew that this guy had a lot of free time and got to be super involved in athletics and sort of anything we had going on as kids. So I sort of always had it in the back of my head that whatever he's doing is creating a pretty good lifestyle. So real estate was not my first pursuit. I went to college at San Francisco State, and when I started, I intended to be an attorney. I took one political science class and immediately switched my major. It was not a good fit for me. I had asked the teacher how it is that the government can just lose money every year and do that in perpetuity, and then they pretty much said that's just how it is. And I'm a math guy, and that just didn't sit right with me. So switched to business. Got a pretty good exposure to the tech scene up in San Francisco. Kind of ran the gamut of different sales jobs. I felt like it was sort of like a slumdog millionaire type of come up in sales, just because I had pretty much every single annoying sales job you can think of, from one of those guys on the sidewalk with the clipboard trying to get you to donate money to save the rainforest, to handing out samples in the grocery store, to cold calling people for different companies. And it was I sort of just learned early on that I have this incredible resilience for rejection, and that it would almost be a game for me. How uncomfortable can I make this? Finished college. San Francisco was crazy expensive at the time and still is now. But I was visiting a friend down in San Diego for New Year's, and he had this great apartment with a pool and parties and good weather and all this stuff. And I asked him what he was paying, and I was paying the same amount to rent a room in like an old house that was gross, as he was paying for an entire apartment with a pool and all this stuff. And I had just finished college, so I didn't really know what I was doing. So just sort of impulsively decided to move down to San Diego.
Wow.
Been here ever since, and don't plan on leaving anytime soon.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, man. That's crazy. I didn't know that. So I didn't know. I don't know about all your childhood, I guess, but that's even serving out samples in the grocery store. That's pretty funny. My kids call those little restaurants when those people are set up in the grocery store. But so with you, and you say with your dad, so was he doing more commercial real estate, or was he doing residential real estate,
Yeah,
or
so he started
lending?
as a broker. He was doing apartments, and then found a niche selling motels. He sold a fair amount of motels in the 80s and 90s. And then after a while, brokerage is not a forever job. So
Yeah.
he made the jump from that and started pooling capital and making private loans, and did that for about 30 years.
Yeah. And that's cool, man. So whenever you were a kid, I know you said like you weren't too like in the know with like, hey, what dad was doing. You just know that he like, made pretty good money and then could also go to all your sporting events and things like that. So that's obviously attractive as a young man. But do you think like when you were being raised, do you wish like you would have been in the office more, been like more exposed to like the business side of things with your dad, or do you think it was like when you're 12, 13, you're just like, hey, I don't want to hear about it, or like,
I was a pretty angsty teenager, so I don't know that I was even prepared to receive the information at that time.
yeah,
A lot. Oftentimes, I'll think, do I wish things would have gone differently? And the conclusion I come to every time is that everything that happened led me to where I'm at now, which is a position that I'm super happy with.
yeah, no, for sure. And yeah, that's what matters, man. That's exciting. Because that's one thing I think of for me having kids. It's like, hey, I have a 8-year old boy and a 6-year-old girl, and then a little tiny baby boy. But my 8-year-old, like, he wants to do real estate and talk about like building things, and we talk about buildings, we talk about all these things. So how involved to have them. I think, yeah, like when you own commercial real estate, like having them go around and pick up the trash and understand the concept of landlords and tenants and ownership and renting and even mortgages and things like that, just to start to expose them to that stuff if they'll listen. Um, it's a shorter attention span. It's a shorter attention span you have with a younger kid. But yeah, that's one thing that I've personally thought of and selfishly asked the question as a fellow dad growing up in commercial real estate. So
Yeah, I mean, I can say one thing that my parents always pushed on me was entrepreneurship and sort of ownership of whatever you're doing. And I think that kind of influence as a child and as a teenager is just invaluable, because it's kind of, it takes this sort of awakening to get out of the matrix of thinking, oh, I'm going to go to school, I'm going to go to grad school, I'm going to get a good job, I'm going to grind it out for 40 years, get a gold watch, at some point I'll have fun.
yeah,
And that, from a super young age, it just didn't seem, I thought I was too smart for that.
yeah. Yeah, no, and that's cool for your parents to instill that in you. Yeah, that's something I don't take for granted either. My dad was he sold insurance and had his own insurance agency when I was being raised, and I remember like being in the office and dude, I remember this is all there's still direct mail and commercial real estate, but a lot of people aren't doing much direct mail anymore. But I remember my dad was sending out envelopes of some sort, but like, man, I would go after school and just lick envelopes, and like whenever he would do a big mailer like once a month or once a quarter, and like, oh dude, I don't know if they didn't have the mighty invention of like the water, like the auto liquor. I don't know what you'd say, what you'd call it, but like, the little tool where you just wet the envelope. But I was just licking these envelopes as a kid, and like, I would just taste glue for days because my dad would have me licking envelopes by the, 2, 3, 400, to the point where just like, Dad, like my tongue's dry and like I can't do this anymore. So those are the fun things that like I remember growing up as a kid. Um, so it's cool to see that your parents have instilled a similar like, hey, the entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial ventures like that is there's a lot of fun in that. There's a lot of freedom and a lot of work, but there's a lot of freedom in it as well. So if you can persevere through. So getting into real estate for you, so you moved down to San Diego for the cheap rent and the pretty girls, and then what after that
Yes.
was the venture into real estate.
Yeah, so I moved down here and I had like a little web design, internet marketing business, and it was, I wasn't making the big bucks, but it was a pretty good lifestyle. I got to say that I worked for myself. However, the one thing that was kind of a grind about it is on these projects, you get your initial 50% payment. Then you do the work, and then you get the balance. And I always found that collecting on that second half of the payment on these online marketing and web design jobs was a huge nuisance. And people were always trying to stretch out the project. And you're like in this disadvantaged position. Whereas in real estate, by the time the broker gets paid, their obligation is done. Like they will not be paid until no more is expected from them. And that format just really was attractive to me. So I got my real estate license, didn't really have a plan, but just knew that I was going to apply maximum effort and would see what happened. So I'd applied to a couple different firms and really no one was taking me seriously. So I ended up just going to work for like a two-man band brokerage that did leasing and tenant rep mostly, which I had thought I was going to sell apartments or shopping centers. I didn't even know anything about representing tenants. So I spent 9 months grinding it out as a tenant rep broker. I think I wrote like 75 LOIs and made less than 10 deals in those first 9 months. So it was, I joke that I know hundreds of ways to not close a deal.
Right.
So I worked with those guys. It was not really quite a culture fit. There's sort of this ecosystem of brokers just taking in new people, grinding them out, and continually turning over agents. And I was very fortunate on one of the deals I was working. The listing broker was an SVN broker, and I had put a proposal in on this property, and I followed up with this guy relentlessly. I'd call him every morning at 8:30 in the morning. I'd call him every afternoon at 4:30 in the afternoon, just to say, you got an update for me on our deal. And after about 3 days of doing this, he was getting pretty perturbed. But he mentioned to me that, if you're going to be working this hard, you might as well come to a real company. And that was sort of my foray into SVN.
Wow. No, and then so when you got your foot in the door with SVN, I think I assume you noticed that they were just playing at a higher level, and it was more of an environment that you could thrive in, I assume.
Yeah, I mean, it was just more of a real company. They had a nice office, that there were other people in the office, that there was sort of this buzz going on. So it just seemed that you need that, and that the more context you can create for yourself, the quicker you'll grow your business.
Yeah, no, for sure. So with you going to SVN, so how long were you with the other company before you went to SVN? Like how long were you in the business?
So I was about 9 months in at the time I made the switch, which made for sort of an interesting dynamic because I had not quite enough experience to be like a standalone broker, but I knew enough that I didn't want to just be kicking up money upstairs unnecessarily. So I made sort of the stubborn decision that I'm not going to have any kind of a senior broker, and that, succeed or fail, I'm just going to do it on my own and give myself the opportunity to reap the maximum reward. And the managing director at the firm was kind of had a blasé attitude about new agents. So he was sort of just bringing on anyone with a lot of ambition. So they went for it. And
Yeah. No, that's awesome, man. So, and yeah, that's kind of how I started as well in the business. Similar, I had the similar, attitude going in of just kind of going for it. I didn't really partner up with anybody too much on deals to get started, but definitely had some good mentors and people around me that were cheering in my corner. But kind of like you said, mainly just paid attention to the people that are like doing well, like, because when you go in there and you don't know what to do and what you're doing, it's kind of like, all right, who in here is making a lot of money? And like, okay, I know these guys are making a lot of money. I see the leaderboard, and it's like, okay, what are they doing? And I looked at what they did, and like, all right, I'm just gonna do what they do. So that's what I did, and things turned out pretty well. So with you, so did you immediately like when you got there and did you like did you have a niche of like property type when you got in of like, hey, did you always say that you were going to do like retail shopping centers, or were you more apartment
no,
focused at first? How'd
yeah,
that go?
no, I am, and perhaps I should have specialized earlier on, but I was pretty agnostic just because you get a lead and you're hungry for business and you work on it. So I kind of done a plethora of everything. I bounce back and forth between doing leasing and doing multifamily sales. And what I sort of learned through doing lots of different deals is that it's all different flavors of the same recipe, if that makes sense. Everyone's posturing. You gotta anticipate people's objections and problems, and that the type of real estate really is just the medium that you're transacting. So whether it's an apartment building or a shopping center, the characters and the players are pretty much the same.
Yeah. And no, I know what you mean by that. So I did specialize and like niche down first, but I was like I wanted to be the apartment guy. I wanted to go sell apartments, and it's pretty funny because like, all right, I'm gonna specialize in apartments and database them and start calling on them, and that's what I did. But as soon as like that restaurant tenant rep, opportunity came available, or that small like landscaping company that needs like 2,000 square feet, I'm like, I'll take it. Yeah, like no, I do that. I'll do it. It's like anything you can do to like get a paycheck and stay in the business is kind of just what you got to do. So, um, well, that's great, man. And then for you to start to have like, when would you say in your brokerage careers when you started to like see real success?
Um, well, I would say there was a couple inflection points. I would say until I was about 18 months in, I didn't feel like I had experienced any success. And
Yeah.
then at about 18 months in, I got hyper focused on my geography. And I basically, there's a section in San Diego called University Ave that it's like one of the main thoroughfares that cuts through the whole town. And I went out to a part of West La Mesa that's a pretty crappy portion of University Ave. And I just walked the streets from the 7200 University to 7400 University and talked to every single owner. And I basically became the number one broker of those two blocks.
Yeah.
And that I had like three different listings in that little pocket right there. And all of a sudden I started experiencing synergy. That like a tenant would call for one space and I actually have three different spaces available on this street. So that suddenly I'm moving the chess pieces around and doing deals got a lot easier. So
Yeah.
at about 18 months in, I got really focused on my geography and I started only working on getting listings. So I would say that was like the initial inflection point. And then about 3 years in, maybe a little over 3 years in, I had a junior agent, and the two of us sort of stumbled backwards into this $5 million shopping center transaction.
Wow.
And it was like, it was very much out of our wheelhouse. Neither of us had done anything that big before. And I'm supposed to be like the senior person who knows what he's doing. And it was a wild ride of a deal. It was super stressful. We had dumping rain the day of the inspection.
Solid.
which if you're a seller's agent at an inspection, you're hoping everything goes perfectly and there's no problems with the property. So,
Yeah,
having dumping rain, especially that this was an older property that had been a bit neglected,
yeah.
was sort of running us through the gambit. And then in the middle of the escrow, a predatory plaintiff filed an ADA lawsuit against the property
Oh man.
in the middle of the escrow. So
Yeah.
we had to negotiate and settle that expeditiously. And it was, I think the whole transaction start to finish was like 7 or 8 months. And it was like 7 or 8 months of like, first thing I think of in the morning, 6 a.m., stressed out about this deal. Last thing I think about when I go to bed, stressed out
Yeah.
about this deal. But we, we closed it. We didn't make a huge amount of money just because we kind of got attacked from all angles on the fee. But it was like a resume piece that really put me on the map in
Yeah.
terms of someone my age and my experience level knocking down a deal like that. And then I would say that is when things started snowballing and I started getting a lot more of these bigger deals.
Yeah, no, that's and so I want to get into those bigger deals and how you did those bigger deals, but you mentioned to me briefly and I have to bring it back up because it sounded funny, it sounded hilarious, but tell me about the marijuana tenants and some of these deals you worked on early on in your career.
Yeah, so I got started in real estate in the end of 2015. And in 2016, 2017, there was just a huge wave of marijuana businesses in California. And basically, what these operators figured out is that they were making so much money running unlicensed pot shops that the penalties for operating illegally were sort of just part of your business plan. So these
Yeah,
people would take a building that should rent for like $2,000 a month, and they'd rent it for $10,000 a month. And if they can stay open for 3 to 6 months in this location, they'll make tons and tons of money. And what would end up happening is eventually the pot shops would get busted, and the cities would file suit against the property owner, and there would be a ton of pressure to do something with the property. So in this same section of West La Mesa that I was already working, there was tons of these. There was like in like one area of the street, there was like 7 or 8 of them. And so I would just keep track of all of them. And when I would find out that they had been busted, the very next day I'd call the property owner and say, just by happenstance, I wanted to reach out to see if you want to sell your property. And a property owner who's just had their illegal pot shop tenant get busted is perhaps the most motivated lead
yeah,
you can ever get. So I got connected with an attorney who worked in a lot of these type of matters and ended up selling like 4 or 5 former illegal pot shops in like a 2 year
wow.
period at the beginning of my career.
That's funny, man. Yeah, people. So why? So many questions there. Why? When these pot tenants got kicked out, or so like the landlord would get slapped with these fines, I assume, for signing the tenant. So was it just like the fines were just crazy, or was it like
Yeah,
you had
usually
some real
what would
pressure?
happen is the city would file a lawsuit and cloud the title on the property, which as soon as you have a cloud on title, you can't refinance. You can't sell to anyone unless you sort out this lawsuit situation. And usually what would happen is the cities would come in with like a huge ask. They'd say, oh, we want $500,000 in fines. And this attorney would go back and say, look, we'll give you 40,000 in fines and we'll agree to sell the property, to a new owner.
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
and that it was kind of like a whack-a-mole situation. They would be super fine. These places would get busted and they'd literally just move directly across the street. And because they had changed addresses, the city attorney's process has to start over. So they
yeah,
get another 6 months of operating this business. So,
yeah.
yeah, funny times, not happening anymore.
That's crazy, man. I remember like now in like today's world, it's so normalized. Like it's so normalized in today's market. But I remember like, or probably around that time when I was a kid and seeing, or when I was a younger kid, I was just like, I would see like these pot shops going up and like pictures of them, like you'd have somebody go visit from California, and like you're in high school or whatever, and you'd see somebody go visit California and like send you pictures of like these big like store with a pot leaf on it, and it's just like, what? Like they're selling weed in there, like they're selling marijuana out of these stores. Like it was just a mind-blowing thing, like whenever it first came out. But nowadays it's like they're on almost every corner. At least like, for most states where, I mean, where it's recreational for sure, but like even Florida, I believe we're still only medicinal here, and it's like, they're still on every block. It seems like, there's a lot of stores, but I mean, what, 10 years ago, it was just like it was still very, very taboo. Um, but that's a heck of a way to get some deals done, man. Whatever you got to do to fill the pipeline.
Yeah, I sort of struggle with anything that I feel is inefficient and kind
Yeah.
of the conventional means of prospecting of just making a ton of calls and doing all that stuff. It wasn't that I didn't have the energy to do it. I just, it sort of pained me inside to do something that was inefficient. So I sort of, with that opportunity and throughout my career, I've just focused on identifying motivation. And it's, sort of the broker's role is to find the motivated seller at the end of the day.
Yeah. No, and that's one thing is, man, taking the warm slash hot shots is because that's what everybody talks about as cold calls. And those are great. Those definitely work. But like you want to make warm calls or hot, like we call them hot shots. Like you want to take those hotter, warmer shots, because, if you make 100 cold calls, like you'll get the same results as if you make, five or six like hot shots or warm calls. So completely agree with you there. So and I mean, for your brokerage career, so when from that $5 million shopping center, man, I've seen multiple deals you've knocked down for like 10, 12, 15, 18 million, like good size, like eight-figure deals. So how did you kind of continue to climb the ranks of like, selling those type of assets and like those type of values?
Yeah, I had a really fortunate break I got a leasing lead for a shopping center here in La Mesa that I did a great job. There was a 9,000 square foot space that had a school that the school had lost their charter, so they couldn't operate anymore. And I found another school that had their building had just been sold, so they needed to move. So it was kind of all of a sudden I have two super motivated parties. So I was able to plug the new school into the space, and the landlord was blown away by this because they had thought it was going to be such a difficult space to fill, and I got them, the perfect tenant right away, super high rent. And I was basically just their guy from that point. And that same client, about a year and a half later, decided to sell that property and gave me the listing, which at that time I was not quite the pedigree of the kind of broker who'd be getting those listings. And I did a great job selling that one. They had another property up in Temecula that I ended up selling for 8.5 million. The first one was 6.8, then 8.5. And through doing those deals and having the listing, you get in touch with the type of leads that you'll never get from cold calling. That just having an attractive listing and sort of the higher end of the price category, all of a sudden you start getting just gold pouring in on the phone. So through doing those two deals, I got connected with some people who were really big time investors, like a huge portfolio, were transacting a lot, and just jumped on the opportunity, did some deals with them, got connected to some more people in a similar space. And what I realized is that the most competitive segment of brokerage is actually for small deals. That it's sort of counterintuitive in a way that people think, I'm just going to go for the smaller stuff because it'll be easier to get it. Whereas every single agent who has less than 5 years experience is competing for the smaller stuff. And all of a sudden, when I got into the 8 million, 10 million, 15 million, it was, I mean, at least in my region here in California, there's maybe like 4 or 5 teams that are like heavy hitters going for these type of deals. and I was the only person who was like a lone ranger trying to knock down these deals. And I think that I was able to use that to my advantage, in a sense that I would tell prospective clients that, I don't need 4 people to close this deal. I'm a one-man army. Here's all the deals that have closed. And, people who own commercial real estate like hard chargers. Someone who's audacious and a little bit cocky is who you want for a broker. So, I think COVID helped a lot. That there was just a huge spike in transactional velocity in 2021, and I got to capitalize on that.
No, that's great, man, and we have a more similar story than we thought. It makes a lot of sense of what you're saying with. Like being the tenacious young broker, because I mean, a lot of what I've learned, and very similar perspective to you, is like a lot of these people that own 10, $15 million properties, they a lot of times like see, if you're a young hungry broker that's calling them and like providing them value, not like having commission breath and not being sleazy about it, but like trying to provide them value however you can, leasing, whatever it is, and build that relationship with them, then, and like you're out there like cold calling them, a lot of them respect that, to a great deal. Like I've picked up listings before where like some of the first things like the guys will say to me is like, man, I appreciate the hustle. Like, oh, I love the hustle. I love that you just called me from this. And then also, similar strategy of like, hey, whenever you're selling a property, you have that $8 million listing, and then you call the $12 million guy, and you're like, hey man, I have this like shopping center in Temecula, like we're about to take it to market, or we just took it to market. I want to put it in front of you. I see you're a property owner in the area. A lot of times, like brokers, even on big teams or small teams, I don't want to categorize them too much, but like just to have the tenacity to like when you have a listing to actually go out and hunt for buyers, because I've heard people tell me before like, man, okay, you're selling this, like a lot of brokers just put up a sign or put it on one of the listing websites, and then like they're done with it, then they go find a buyer and it sells. But if you're out there like talking to other property owners, in their mind what they think is like, man, whenever I go to sell my property, like I want to hire a broker that's out there pounding the phones to like call other property owners, So I think that's one thing that I've gotten respect from before, and which I think like us younger guys and like the younger people that are aggressive can use to their advantage. They can really use that to their advantage rather than it being a hindrance, because, in our minds, it's like, oh man, we're younger, we haven't made the, earlier on in your career, you're just like, you haven't made the big name for yourself. You don't have the pedigree, but it's like, man, I've got hustle. I've got work ethic, and then you can use that to your advantage, where people want to do deals with brokers like that. So,
and I think early on in your career, you see a lot of people who are more established, and you have kind of like this mythology about them that you think that they're on this incredible level that you're so far away from. And then you start knocking down a couple deals, you meet a couple of these people in person, and you realize they're all human.
Yeah.
And you meet some of these owners, and, someone who has 100 million in assets, you sit down with them at Starbucks, and they're just an ordinary person. And I think that there's a lot of psyching yourself out about knocking down bigger deals that younger brokers try to stray away from it because they just think it's a bad idea. When I would say it's there's less competition, and there's not less work, but the work is way more worth it in terms of how lucrative it is.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I 100% agree there. And then also like I've noticed like each transaction has its things. Like there's work to do in every transaction, but I remember the first deal that I did that was bigger. It was like 7 million. I've done like, $500,000 deals and like in $1 million deals, $2 million deals at this point. But like the amount of like, say, call it brain damage, but the amount of like work that is like unnecessary, or people just like dealing with other people that like don't have their stuff together. They're not approved for financing. All their records and P&Ls and rent roll is all like done on a napkin. So like going from like the smaller transactions, you're going to find more people that like that don't have their stuff together versus the assets that are like 5, 7, 10 million. It's like, man, these people they have CPAs, they have attorneys, they have their bankers lined up, they have everybody lined up, all the vendors and contractors and management companies and all those things. And it's pretty streamlined, and like everybody is kind of playing at the top of their game, where you can really run efficiently as a broker then, and not so much do like, all right, let me be your CPA and dig through your like tax records. Let me try and like put together your rent roll for you, stuff like that. So that's big on the bigger deals, I think. So, man, with I want to shift gears here a little bit, and talk about you branching out now, I guess even before then, because you started buying deals for yourself before you branched out. So, what was the first deal that you bought? When did you do that in your career? What was that deal? How did it go? Where'd you find it? How'd you structure it? If you could tell us more about that, that'd be awesome.
Yes. So it's the first deal I bought that was like strictly an investment deal was a 4-bedroom townhome here in La Mesa, which is the first city east of San Diego, which is where I live. It was an older woman had moved into assisted living, and the house was vacant, and the kids needed to sell it. They listed it on the MLS with an agent who did not do a very good job with the marketing. I would say that's been sort of a secret for me finding deals, is if you see those cell phone pictures with, and the house is dirty and nothing is framed correctly, that there is gold and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they had put it on for $499. I called the agent immediately, met him there in person. I found if you really want to lock down a deal, you got to do it in person. Anyone can tell you anything you want to hear on the phone, but in person is where deals get done. So we met him in person. I gassed the agent up on the whole, you can be our agent, you can be the seller's agent, and which surprisingly, this is like a foreign concept for most realtors. The idea was, commercial real estate, if possible, we want to double in the deal. Realtors will go 20 years without even realizing you can do that.
Yeah.
We ended up going under contract at 465. Did our inspections. It was a screaming deal. It would have been a screaming deal at $499. We struggled to get the financing. I had like one good year in the business at that point, and most lenders want to see 2 years of that. So we knew it was such a good deal that we just kept pushing through, and we were super fortunate that we found a private lender who was able to lend on it. So we closed it. We did a super tacky renovation, probably the most mediocre renovation I've ever done. But we were on a shoestring budget. We bought like the cheapest carpet Home Depot had, and we painted the cabinets instead of replacing them. And I, for some time, had been doing research into Section 8 housing. There's a lot of anti-landlord sentiment and rent control and this kind of stuff in California, as I'm sure a lot of people talk about. So the idea of having guaranteed rent and not having to deal with a market rate tenant was really appealing to me. Plus, in this specific zip code, the Section 8 rent was above the market rent. So we bought this thing for $460. And we rented it for $4,000 a month.
Whoa.
Yeah. So we were cranking. We had an interest only loan, so we were cash flowing about $2,000 a month on our very first deal. We felt like kings. Yeah. About 6 or 7 months go by. I get a notice from the HOA that's basically like a warning violation that we are harboring a nuisance. I go over to the property, and it was kind of like a scene out of Boys in the Hood. I had picked the wrong tenant, and they started having lots of people over, and they're fixing cars in the common area and smoking and drinking and being hostile to the neighbors, and it really, I had a situation on my hands. So
Yeah.
fortunately, here in San Diego, the waiting list to get a Section 8 voucher is over 10 years. It's absolutely absurd. I don't know how the system can function with a 10-year waiting list, but because of that, as a Section 8 landlord, you totally have the upper hand. That the tenant does not want to do anything to risk losing that voucher. So I didn't hire an attorney. I just wrote him a letter myself, basically explaining that, I don't want to mess up your situation, but you got to leave. Like, this isn't going to work. Yeah. And without an attorney, I got the tenant out in less than 30 days. So that was a pretty big win. However, we had really burnt out our relationship with the HOA. So we decided it was just time to sell the property. Fortunately, we had bought it in 2021. We sold it in 2022. The market had boomed during that period because of the low interest rates. So we ended up selling it for $705 in like less than a year. We bought it for $461, sold it for $705. Took that money, exchanged it, bought another condo in a different complex where we chose a better tenant this time, as well as we bought a commercial property in Lemon Grove, a little 2-tenant strip center that we had come across in just our brokerage prospecting. And that was, I guess, the first deal, and then into the next deals.
Yeah. No, that's awesome, man. So the first commercial deal you did, the small 2-unit shopping center, did you still use private money on that one? Or was it vacant when you bought it? Like, how did that go?
Yeah, so we used the same private money lender that we had used on the previous property, just because we had I think a 24-month loan that we paid off in 8 months. So he was happy with the interest he was making and was ready to do another deal with us. So we had found this thing off market. It was out of town owner, property had quite a bit of deferred maintenance and had incredibly low rents. I mean, it was like less than $1 a square foot gross. Which, Southern California, the rent's a lot higher than that. So fortunately, the tenants were on short-term leases. So we just, made deals for them to get out, and then they were both cooperative with that. We had to put a lot more money into the building than we thought. It was definitely very humbling, just because I had been transacting big commercial deals for years, and I was a bit of a hotshot, and then I buy this tiny little commercial property, and I felt like I was totally in over my head. But we coughed up the dough. Once you're that deep into a deal, you have no choice but to just make the moves that you have to make. Leased it up. We had a massage tenant move into the first half. We put up a bunch of money for TI to get them built out, and in exchange, they're paying what I feel to be a very premium rent. And then we got a salon tenant to move in the other half. We had renovated that unit on spec, which I wish I had done that sooner. We sort of lollygagged for 3 or 4 months with the unit in bad shape, hoping we'd find a tenant who would fix it up, which, 750 square foot tenants are not coughing up money to do their own build out. We renovated it on spec, and then we leased it in less than 2 weeks after that. So definitely a lesson learned that if you get these smaller retail spaces, you're just better off fixing them up in speculation of getting a tenant. But we got the salon in there, and I think on a cap rate basis for our purchase plus what we've spent on renovations, we're at a 10% cap rate on that property. So it's humming along for the time being, but a lot of lessons learned. And I would say that, commercial property ownership is definitely a much more advanced investment than residential properties.
Yeah. And is that the way? So I mean, the way you're going to continue to go, or use it, is it going to be more predominantly commercial, or you still dabble in the residential opportunities? Like, what's the strategy with
Yeah.
investments moving forward?
Yes, I just bought a deal about 2 weeks ago for a condo that was in distressed condition that we're going to renovate and lease. And I think moving forward, at least for the time being, the bulk of the investing is going to be in residential stuff. It's a lot more predictable. The problems are way smaller, and there seems to be much more velocity in terms of like realizing your gain and refinancing and stuff like that. Whereas I see commercial properties more as like a yield play that once you have amounts of capital that are challenging to deploy into residential properties, then you buy something bigger, focus on your cash on cash returns. Whereas,
Yeah.
right now we're pretty much just targeting small distressed residential properties.
Yeah. There you go. That's awesome, man. And so for you to go out on your own and kind of make that jump, was it? Would you say like it was as scary as you thought? Like, what were some of the things like that weren't as scary as you thought, or were like, hey, I didn't expect this, and this was a whole lot more scarier. Like, kind of what was that transition like, and what were some of the expectations going in, and then also like the reality from that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I had some butterflies in my stomach about, going into upper management and, telling them that I was going to depart.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, having a kid, you get a ton of clarity real quickly.
Yeah.
And it was, while I had been thinking about this for a little bit, as soon as I had the kid, it was like within a week, I went in and made the jump. And I would say, I think my circumstance is a little different just because usually people will leave to start a brokerage company or to try to be a competitor to the company they used to work for. Whereas right now, with the rental portfolio that I have, it pretty much floats the boat in terms of covering my monthly expenses. So I'm focusing now mostly on being a father, continuing to buy good deals. However, I think like the bulk of my brokerage is behind me at this point.
Yeah.
So it was not scary in that sense that I have a pretty good safety net with these rental properties. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's cool, man. And yeah, having kids will make you they'll make you act fast, act certain, and ultimately like there's a much bigger responsibility in your life now. So it's kind of like, hey, man, it's dad time. You got to do what you got to do, and what are you going to build? So to step out and start to build something for yourself, I think is very honorable. So that's a cool thing to do, man. So my hat's off to you in that. So, man, well, I think I've hammered through questions here. I think that's all the questions I have for you, man. Anything else, as far as it goes for the investing side of things, the taking bigger shots at brokerage deals, man? Is there anything else on your mind you wanted to add as flavor to the show today?
Ever since I made the jump, I've had a lot of younger folks reach out to me who are just getting in the business, asking me what they should do, how do they put themselves on the right path. And what's been sort of the recurring piece of advice that I give people is just make yourself super uncomfortable. And it's, because in the beginning, you don't have closings coming up. You don't have listings. It's really hard to have like a daily barometer of am I doing enough to move the ball forward? And I look back at different times earlier in my career where I made myself super uncomfortable. And a lot of the times were flops, that they weren't like big wins, but it was the tenacity that gets built by going out and making yourself uncomfortable, is what puts you in the position that when that big opportunity comes along, you're razor sharp, and your setbacks are productive. It doesn't feel productive in the moment, when you have a deal blow up on you that you've been working on for 6 months. But there's little puzzle pieces that you'll learn from that will put you in a position to knock down the big deal when the opportunity comes up. So
Yeah.
I would say sort of just go out and fail and make yourself uncomfortable, and that would be my brokerage advice. Investing advice, I would say just get started. I was 5 years into the business before I bought my first deal, and I didn't know what I was doing then, and I didn't know I was doing it for a few years before that. So I think it's always going to seem too expensive, and it's always going to seem that you're biting off too much. But if you wait for the perfect deal that makes you completely comfortable, it'll be 20 years. And that with appreciation and with compounding returns, the first deal I bought went up 50% in less than a year. So I would just say get started early. Real estate leaves you such a comfortable margin to make mistakes versus other investing vehicles that it's just get started.
Yeah. No, that's super good advice, man. Man, Erik, thank you so much for coming on. And before you go, man, where can people find you? Where can people connect with you? I know you're on LinkedIn, have a good presence there, but any other social platforms?
Yeah, I would say LinkedIn is the best way to get in touch with me. People can email me, Erik@Egelko.com. Easy to find, and I'm happy to give free advice to people who are looking for it.
No, and that's helpful, man. There's a lot of younger people in the space, and you've done incredibly well in this business. So I know that's very, very helpful today. So awesome, man. Well, thanks so much for